Hey, I want to run through a great song that the Dead played much through their early career, really from the years 1969 throughout 1971. It was a staple of their shows and a fan favorite, one by that Pigpen would sing, that really dropped out of the rotation. So hard to handle. Basic framework for the song is B minor pentatonic. So just looking at the pattern, B, D, E, F sharp, A, B. If you're not already in the habit, it's good to at least learn some of the, if not the outright notes, at least know some of the intervals. So we got the 1, the flat 3, the 4, the 5, flat 7, and then back to our octave. As for the chords, staple is going to be B and the 5, which is the F sharp. Now there's going to be more into it than just that, but that's the framework. Now, that's important. Recognize the other places on the neck where that can be played. The B, D, E, F sharp. Up here, here's our B again. B, D, F sharp. Sorry. And then notice up here. All those are going to factor in. Now, as we're going to see, a key extra note that gets thrown in that makes all the difference in the world is going to be, in addition to our A, we're also going to throw in a G sharp for reasons I'll explain and show you the important role that that plays. Now, what a lot of people know is that the Black Crowes did a version of Hard to Handle around 1990. What a lot of people don't know is that the Dead were actually covering Otis Redding, who was the original performer and writer of this song, Hard to Handle. His version came out in around 1968. The Black Crowes cover version really is very true to what Otis Redding did. The Dead take what Redding did, but they modify it in significant ways. I think it'll be instructive to run through what Otis Redding does and then show you what the Dead do to it, where they put their distinctive stamp on it, as opposed to the Black Crowes that really just take exactly what Redding is doing and don't really transform it at all. Now, the way Redding starts and the way the Black Crowes do it is with this opening lick. Now, that's the basic version. Now, it may be, when I listen carefully, sometimes it sounds like he might actually be using the major pentatonic on the way up and the minor on the way down. So doing that, it would be, as opposed to, it would be, now after he does that, then he goes into, well, actually, it's a piano that's doing that, and then there's a great horn line on top of it. Piano part continues. Now there is a guitar playing, and the guitar and the piano are basically doing a rhythm like this, just on the B. And when it moves up, actually moves it up to the F sharp. So we get, hey, little thing, blah, 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 blah. I'm sure hard to handle. Now, what Redding does next is something that the Dead don't do at all, but which the Black Crowes do, which is, so they do a D, E, and then A, E, B. Now the Dead leave out that little move from the D up to the E, but they do make heavy use again and again of the E, A, B. Now, through that little strumming back and forth on just the plain old B, underneath, if you listen to the guitar part, you'll hear this extra little lick thrown in. Where we get that G sharp that I mentioned. Now when the Dead take over, they're going to make extensive use of that. In fact, that's going to be the linchpin for what Bobby adds, which really just transforms the song completely. Right, so there's the basic rundown of the Otis Redding and the Black Crowes version. Now what I'm going to do is show you what the Dead did to it to transform it into something, I think, extra special. The Redding version, if you've never listened to it, give it a listen. It's a great song in its own right. It's definitely got more of an R&B feel. The Dead kind of give it a blues twist, which is not unexpected given that it was Pigpen who was singing. So here's what the Dead do to transform it, put their stamp on it. Now the first thing Jerry does is he moves the starting point up an octave. Instead of using this B, he moves it up here. So B, D, E, and then instead of hitting the F sharp, he actually bends it all the way up to the F sharp. Several things. Again, he moves it up an octave. He bends to get up to that F sharp as opposed to the way Redding does it. Then, to give it an extra blues lick, he hits that note, which is kind of a common blues lick, to bend. And then, repeated use of the A, E, B, altering the rhythm. And sometimes Bobby and Jerry are kind of out of sync, but all right, that's the first transformation. Now the second, and what I think the major transformation, comes in what Bobby does. His part really, I think, makes the song interesting. All right, so let me go through now what Bobby does. Now the chords that Bobby uses, it's a B, and we mentioned the F sharp, which if you think about it, it's the 1 and the 5. You'd expect as a rock or blues-based song for the 4 to show up somewhere, which would be the E. And he in fact gets it in there. Remember I'd mentioned that little lick. Well, that G sharp, that's the third of an E chord. So think about an E chord. Now one of Bobby's favorite ways of playing the E chord is to invert it. You take that little bar shape where you've got the B, E, G sharp, frets it that way, and then grabs the G sharp here. And then sometimes for extra effect, he fingers the B up here. But in this case, so we got this little bar shape, then he adds 2 fingers here. You could think of it as it's kind of the A minor shape. Another way to think about it is how to turn an A chord into a D. He does it again. So we got this. It's actually something that Pete Townsend uses. You think about the song, Who Are You? So Bobby uses that, then that little shape, and then a classic Bobby little trill, which would be on the D, get us back to the B. So put them all together and you get something like this. And again, that's really just playing with that little that G sharp, but he adds a completely different dimension to it and really adds a bit of funk himself to the progression by playing with that G sharp, but turning it all the way really into an E chord and then messing around with the E chord. All right? That's an important part. Now, the next mystery that gets solved when you recognize, again, that little, essentially the step down from the A to the G sharp, is you get to understand something that's going on in the very opening. So when Jerry's doing his Phil comes in and adds his own notes, and sometimes Bobby accompanies him and sometimes he doesn't. And the first time he comes in with a B. The second time he comes in, it's going to be a little step down. Instead of it being from the A to the G sharp up here, it's going to be here, this A. And then down to our F sharp. And then, so let me change the settings a little bit so you can actually maybe hear the way Phil would play it. Now to try to bring out Phil's part, play with the settings a little bit and just drop everything down an octave. So you have to use your imagination a little bit to imagine this lick being played actually an octave higher, so I can show you what Phil's doing. So while Jerry's doing, again, imagine an octave higher. Now again, the key move being that, just like we had it up here, A to G sharp, and then the G sharp to the F sharp, and then A, E, B. Put them together and you got that interesting combination. Again, all coming from something that's in the original, the Otis Redding version, but left in there kind of in the background implicitly that they did pick up, add to it, and make quite interesting. Now that we got the basics down, I'll show you a couple of other little pieces of it. So while Bobby's doing through the verses, and varying the rhythm and changing that up slightly, Jerry's essentially doing, just staying on the B. And sometimes doing something like the little Otis riff. And eventually, as in the original, it moves up to the F sharp. Now Jerry will remember that other place where we showed the basic B minor pentatonic up here. Do some licks up there. Now, the solo that he does, again, is going to be primarily around the B minor pentatonic. And then don't forget, it's going to come back after the little lick. Now eventually they're going to go off into a jam. That's one of the things that makes this song interesting, is in some ways it's a tight song, not an extended, overly long exploratory song like Dark Star, the other one, or Love Light, like they were doing around that time. But it's got its own distinctive jam. And here it is very hard to say something predictable about what Bobby's doing. Often he's hanging around the B. Sometimes he does something simple like plays the B in the D shape all the way up at the 11th and alternates that with an actual E at the 12th. Other times, when he's hanging around the B, especially as the jam comes to an end, you'll hear, at times, a movement that's got B, A, D, F sharp, before he moves back to the basic pattern. It can be hard to hear, and it's not something that he plays regularly, predictably. The jams really do go off in their own direction, and each version really is quite different. One of the things that makes it so different is all the different voicings. So we've got our B here, A, D, F sharp, but think about all the different ways you can voice it. You can have your B here, your A here, your D here, and then considering that shape I showed you before about how he does the E chord, you can do the D that way too. So you can do a D, you can move your F sharp in the same way. So you really have quite a wide range of options, all within a couple of frets. I think this is a place where something that Bobby said over and over again becomes relevant, the role he sees himself playing. Jerry's playing all kinds of ongoing solo lines. Phil is essentially playing bass as a solo instrument as well, all kinds of long, complicated lines. And Weir describes his job very often as listening to what Lesh and Garcia are doing and finding chords that fit in between what they're doing. So instead of leading, he's trying to find something that works between the low end and the high end, Phil and Jerry. And depending on what Phil is doing very often, it's going to lead Bobby to picking the chord selections that he does, which is why I think in the jam you get such a variety in the ways in which it plays out. Sometimes it's fast, sometimes it's slow, sometimes there's not a lot of chord changing on Weir's part, sometimes there is. If you're playing it, I think the best thing to do is just familiarize yourself with all the different places where you can fret and give voice to those basic chords, be it the B or the F sharp, do it up here, or like this, and the D here, or even up here, or here. And keeping all that stuff in mind, you can come up with, ideally, something that's interesting in its own right, just as the Dead did. All right, hope that was of some use. Take it easy.